Get ready, because today I'm going to share some do's and don'ts for writing your first novel. By the way, my name is Brandon McNulty. I'm the author of Bad Parts, and welcome to my writing channel. I've been getting a lot of questions from my subscribers about how to navigate the process of writing your first novel, and this is going to be something that's difficult for most writers, so I thought we'd devote some time to that today. We'll talk strategy, and I've got 10 tips that'll help you with this process. 5 of the tips are things that you absolutely should not do during the writing process, and then the other 5 will be ones that I would recommend that you should do. Now, keep in mind, every writer is different, so if you do find that some of these tips clash with your own process, you don't have to take all of my advice 100% seriously. Figure out what works best for you. And one other thing I want to throw out there before we get into the tips is that although Bad Parts was the first novel that I released, I had actually written about 8 or 9 just awful books before then, ones that they never saw the light of day. I would never even subject people to reading them. But I think this is just something to keep in mind, that when it does come to writing your first novel, for most of us, there's going to be a lot of trial and error. Keep that in mind and don't beat yourself up too bad if you are struggling. First tip, don't think that this is the novel that defines you or your career. If you get into that mindset, if you put all that pressure on yourself, the writing process will suffer as a result. Instead, what you want to do, you want to accept that your first novel may end up as a complete and total disaster. And if that is the case, no worries. You make mistakes, you learn from them, you grow. And that's what you should be focusing on. Focus on growth. Focus on trying out new things. Focus on learning to love the process. Focus on learning to take risks and get creative and try out different things. Experiment. Do those sorts of things instead of worrying about getting everything perfect right from the start. Second tip, if I were writing my first novel, I would grab my 5 favorite books off the shelf and start flipping through them. A lot of times when we do write our first novel, it's going to be based on some of our favorite books, or it's going to be built from some of the key elements from our favorite books. And what you want to do, flip through those books, figure out what you loved about them. Maybe it's something small, like a particular side character, or maybe it's something big, like the basic shape of the plot. Whatever it is, take some of those key elements and sprinkle them into the story you're working on right now. Tip number 3, don't value the outcome over the process. This is a major mistake that a lot of newer writers make. They fixate on the outcome of their writing journey. They think about the finished book and the glowing reviews and the bestseller lists and the movie adaptations and all the other big stuff. Now, to be clear, there is nothing wrong with dreaming big. But if you try to force yourself to cater to a mass audience, or you force yourself to write something that you think a large audience will enjoy, oftentimes you're going to end up writing something you hate. And if you hate your story, audiences will hate it too. If you try to please some imaginary audience, your process is going to suffer. For instance, you might have a great idea for a small, intimate story, but if you try to blow things up so everything is epic and there's world-altering stakes, the story's probably going to suffer. Same thing happens if you're writing like a gritty, nasty horror tale and you say to yourself, well, this is pretty nasty. I don't know if a mass audience is going to accept this. You can't worry about these things. And I think the lesson here is that you need to take a story as it naturally comes. And don't try to force it to be something that it's not. And remember that if you write a good story, you will find an audience. Don't worry about marketability, because any good story can be marketable. Tip number 4, revive dead ideas and bring them into a new story. If you've been writing for more than a week, there's a good chance you've written a bad story. And maybe if you were lucky, you had some bright spots in that story. Maybe a character you liked or a setting you thought was cool. Little things like that, you can always bring those back and transplant them into a new novel that you're working on. For example, one of the first novels I ever wrote was this 1,000-page disaster of a story. It was awful. And I spent months on it. I wasted so much time. But there was one bright spot from it, and it was that the main character was this guitarist. Her name was Ash Hudson. I liked her a lot. I thought she was an interesting character. And later on, when I started writing my novel Bad Parts, I was looking for a main character, and I thought, you know what? I liked Ash Hudson. I want to bring her into this story. And that's what I ended up doing. I built the conflict of Bad Parts around her, and it helped so much because I already had this ready-made character who could step into the story and drive the plot. Tip number 5, don't write in circles. And this means that you're writing scenes that have no consequences. Instead of writing scenes that push the story toward its conclusion, you're just writing these basic events that just keep happening again and again without any meaningful impact on the storyline. And what this is, it's actually a form of procrastination. Basically, what's happening is we want to write a story. We're dedicated to writing a novel, but at the same time, we're afraid of failing. We're afraid of making mistakes. And if you find yourself in this situation, you're probably going to make a compromise. You're going to keep writing. You're going to write every single chance you get. You're going to write all these different scenes, but none of those scenes are going to go anywhere because you don't want to take risks. You don't want to make mistakes. Now, if you do find yourself in a situation where you're writing a novel and it's just going nowhere, it's going in circles, one thing you want to do, take a step back, ask yourself, is your villain being active? Is your villain causing problems for the hero, getting into conflict with the hero? Also ask yourself, do you have a clear understanding of plot structure? Do you know where this story is going or where the next plot structure beat you want to hit is? If you don't understand these things, it may be time to study plot structure or take a little time to map out your story, figure out where it's going. Step number 6 is to discuss your story idea with sincere friends. And this is a great way to test things out. It's a great way to see if your idea is working or if it can be improved. One thing I do anytime I have an idea for a novel, I go to my one buddy, Paul, I tell him about it, and if his eyes light up, I know it's an idea worth pursuing. On the other hand, if he just kind of says, oh yeah, that sounds great, Brandon, and he's just kind of nodding and smiling, then I know that the idea is either worth scrapping or maybe I need to revise things or improve it in some way. But I think it helps if you keep some friends around you who have good taste in stories and you pitch ideas to them every now and then. And one thing I'd also recommend here, pitch these ideas in person. That way you can see instant reactions and honest reactions. On the other hand, if you text or email your friends and you ask them what they think, they might doctor up their response or they might be a little too kind to you in order to protect your ego. Step number 7, don't fall victim to over-planning. I know a lot of writers like to plan ahead before jumping in and actually writing the novel, and that's totally fine. There is nothing wrong with planning before you get into the nitty-gritty action of the story. But some writers get into planning so much that they never actually write a single word of their story, and that's a major problem. Not just because the story isn't getting written, but also because you're robbing yourself of the opportunity to get valuable experience and make tons of mistakes that you can learn from. And one thing to keep in mind here is that if you are a planner and you want to plan ahead before you actually get into the real meat of your story, one thing to keep in mind, I'd say for every week that you spend planning, set aside one day where you actually get into the story, maybe write the opening scene or write a pivotal scene, just to test out how things are going, just to test out what to expect from the actual drafting process. Tip number 8 is to embrace what's working, even if it isn't part of your original plan. A lot of people, they schedule things ahead of time. They like to have an idea of what the story is going to look like, and then when they're actually in the writing process, there's an exciting possibility, and instead of embracing that exciting possibility and seeing where it goes, they steer clear and stick to the original plan, which oftentimes is going to be a safer, less exciting alternative. Never shy away from excitement or from cool ideas or creativity. Later on, you can always cut or revise the things you don't like, but if you don't take any risks along the way, you won't have anything worth revising. Step number 9, don't obsess over your opening pages. And this is something a lot of writers do. It's something that I've done in the past, especially with bad parts. But a lot of times what writers will do, they will fixate on getting those opening pages as perfect as possible because they want to make that strong first impression. They want to grab the reader from page 1 and never let go of them. And the thing is, if you obsess over your opening pages and you rewrite them and you devote all this time to rewrites and revisions and edits and polishing, and then once it's polished, you decide you want to rewrite it again, so you go through that whole process again, and you devote all this time and energy to the first couple pages or the first chapter, you're wasting all that time and energy that could be spread out over the course of the rest of the story, the other 99% of the book. So keep this in mind. Yes, a first impression is important, but you also want to save some of that time and energy for the rest of the book because just getting the audience in the door isn't enough. You have to keep them on the page from start to finish. Finally, tip number 10 is to finish drafting your novel as soon as possible. And one major mistake that a lot of us writers make when approaching our first novel, we get into this mindset where the novel is this grand, epic journey that we have to go on, and the drafting process should take years or even our entire lifetime. And the reality is that it's probably only going to take a few months at most. I think 2 months would be a good target. I mean, it all depends on how dedicated you are and how much time you have, but I think if you're confident and you really want to write a novel, you should be trying to finish it in about 2 months or 3 months. The reason for this is that once you finish writing a novel, things become clear to you. You all of a sudden start recognizing different strengths and weaknesses in your book. You say to yourself, oh, well, now that I know how it ends, now I know which sections of the story are slow, which sections of the story need to get cut, what needs to get added. All these different things become very clear to you once you finish drafting. Now, it's important to remember that once you do finish drafting, that is not the end of the process. You still have to revise, edit, polish, and you're going to have rewrites and all kinds of things going on. But I think it's very important that you just finish that drafting phase as soon as possible. That way you can work with the story as a whole. You can see the different problems, you can see the different strengths, and you can make adjustments as necessary. And this will get you further along in the process much sooner. So I hope this helps. Question of the day: how long ago did you first attempt to write a novel? Let us know in the comments section below. Thank you for watching. If you want to support the channel, please pick up a copy of any one of my books and be sure to leave reviews on Amazon. Bad Parts is great if you like small town horror. It's about people trading away their sick and injured body parts in order to get healthy again. And also, if you want to support the channel, like, share, and subscribe. Check out my other videos, tell other people about it. And as always, remember to keep on writing.